In this video session, I want to show you how easy it is to create a table with inside Dreamweaver. Now, I have my document open, and I'm in currently the split view mode, which will allow me to see the code on the left and the design side on the right. And whenever you want to insert a table, it doesn't matter which side you happen to be working in. Just simply put your cursor wherever you want to insert the table. So for this particular example, I'm going to click on the design side, and I'm going to come up here to insert and drop down to table. Or what I can do is I can actually go inside my classic design mode, choose the common tab, and then click on the table icon. Now, regardless of whatever method you use, the following pop-up window will come open. Now, here's where we set our table dimensions. Inside the table size, we can set the number of rows. Let's go and do 5. And for columns, we can set it to be 3. Doesn't matter what you set? Absolutely not. Whatever dimensions that you add in here, you can always come back and change later. For the table width, we have the option of either using percent or pixels. If you do percent, it will automatically stretch itself to be a certain percentage size of the element that it sits within, whether it's your overall page, your overall browser display, or a certain sized element. But for this example, I'm going to go ahead and choose pixels, and let's give it a dimension of 600. Now for the border thickness, this applies to a border to the outside of your table. This way, whenever it displays inside of a browser, it will actually have an edge. Now if you have a border thickness of 0, there will be absolutely no edge. As long as you have a border of 1, an edge will appear. And in this particular case, let's go and do 10 because I want to show you what it does. Now the cell padding controls the amount of space between the inner wall of a cell and the content. And the key thing to remember here is the word padding. Much like your CSS, padding is applied to the inside of an element. Here, in this case, the padding is applied to the inside of the cell. It creates a space between the inner cell wall and the content. Let's go and do 5 for right now. And of course, your cell spacing. This controls the amount of space in between each cell. And let's go ahead and make that 20, just because I want to show you what it looks like. Now our next section is our header. You can choose none, or you can automatically choose the left column or the top row to automatically have the header style. And keep in mind that whenever we talk about headers, basically they're bolded. Okay? Or you can have it to be both, whichever one you choose. And keep in mind you can always come back and change this later. But for right now, let's go and choose top to sort of show you what that'll look like. Now when it comes to accessibility, this is important to remember for ADA compliance. Your caption, this will appear above your table. So for example, if I were to type in lunch specials, that will appear above the table. Now, summary works much like the alternative attribute inside an image. You can actually create a description that will not show up on your web page, but it's there for screen readers to pick up. So for example, we could say that this is the menu for lunches on Mondays and Wednesdays. All right, and we'll hit OK. So now our table has been created. Let's go and take a look at some of the elements on here based on the things that we set. So for example, you see lunch specials. That is the caption that has been set, and you can see that over here inside the code. There's the caption right there. Oh, and by the way, all this other code automatically generated by Dreamweaver. Very nice. Now this solid gray line around the table, that's my border. And you can sort of see it's rather thick, and we'll change that in just a second. Now this big gap of space in between each cell, that's my cell spacing. It puts space between the cells. And of course you can't see the cell padding, but the cell padding is applied to the inside of the cell. Right? So now we mentioned that nothing that we did was permanent. We can always go back and change it. So let's show you how you can do that. By clicking the outside of your table, I'm going to take my mouse here and move it over the outer edge until I get this sort of double line or arrow looking thing. And I'm going to click on the outside. And you'll notice that my properties window changes. This is the properties for the above table. Now what I can do here is the first thing I can do is I can assign this table a name. And this is great if you're developing multiple tables and each one will have sort of their own CSS. This is great because you can actually go through and create CSS styles for each table. So for example, we'll call this one lunch. And whenever I do that inside my code, it will automatically assign this table an ID. Now here you can see the number of rows and the number of columns that we have, and we can always adjust those. We can always adjust the width of our table right here. And here's our cell padding and our cell space, which can also be adjusted. So let's go and change this cell spacing to be 10. And notice the change above. And of course that border. That border is way too much. Let's just change it down to 1 and hit enter. Much thinner. Now what happens if you happen to have a border of 0? Well, if I put in a border of 0, notice how I still have these dotted lines. Is that how it will appear inside the browser? No. In fact, if we look at how it will look like inside the browser, notice there's no lines at all. How come? Well, that's because we set that border to 0. But the reason that Dreamweaver goes ahead and puts those dotted lines in there for you is so that whenever you're working inside your design mode, you can see where they're at. So let's click out the outside of this edge just one more time and take a look. Now you'll notice we have this align. This works much like your text align or your paragraph alignment. You can align it to the left of the page, the center of the page, or the right. Let's go and choose center. And of course this class is basically, if you happen to have a class for this particular table, you could assign it here. Now to really show the other options that we have when working with tables, we're going to need to add some content. So I'm going to go and jump into my other table, which I've done so. This is content that I've brought in from Microsoft Word. Now, one of the things I want to tell you is that whenever you're working with text that you're bringing in from Microsoft Word, you have to be aware that if you've applied any styles or any formatting to your Word document, keep in mind that if you were to just copy and do a straight paste, it will often bring in that formatting and style with it, and that can cause some problems. So what do? Well, inside Microsoft Word, whenever you happen to select your text and you right-click on it and choose Copy, inside Dreamweaver, the best thing that you can do, you want to right-click inside the cell that you're going to put it in and drop down to Paste Special. And whenever you do that, this pop-up window comes up. You want to make sure to choose text only, because if you choose any one of these other options, you'll bring in the formatting already done inside Word, and that can cause a bit of problem later on. So the best thing to do, just insert the text, not the formatting. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel because I've already done all that. But just make sure that you paste the text only. So here we've got our text inside of our table, and let's go and show you a few more things. Now again, if I select the outside of the table, I get the properties panel for the overall table. But if I select the inside of a cell, I get the properties for that particular cell. And let's go and take a look and see what options we have. So inside my properties panel, I'm selected inside the cell. I have a couple things that I can do. I can change the horizontal alignment to be left, center, or right. If I choose left, notice how the text goes to the left. If I choose right, notice how it goes to the right. And of course the center will automatically center it for me. Now you'll notice that whenever I did that, it only applied to the cell that I had selected. What if I want to do multiple cells at once? In that case, I can click inside of a cell, hold down the mouse, and then drag my mouse down, and then let go, and this will select all the items inside that column. And now whenever I change the horizontal, let's go and do center so you can see it, notice how it changes all those elements. So I can change multiple cells at once. So I'm going to go and change that back to left, do all of them, and then I'm just going to click inside this upper one and then change that to be centered. Okay, so that's the horizontal. That's what it does. It moves it left, right, or center. Now what the vertical does, I'm going to click inside this cell. The vertical does, it controls where your content will sit within inside the row. So if I choose top, notice how the text goes to the top of the row. If I choose middle, it goes to the middle of the row, and that middle is determined by the overall height of the row. So the more text that you have in any one of these particular cells inside that row, the larger it's going to become. And then of course I can always choose bottom and so forth. Let's go back and choose top. And if I want to do multiple cells, then I can highlight all of them and then change that to top. Okay? And I think the default is actually middle, so you may want to check that. Alright, so we've changed the horizontal, we've changed the vertical. Now what are the W and H for? The W is for the width of your column. You can actually set your columns to be a certain width. The height is for the height of your row. Now keep in mind that whenever you're going to adjust the width, you do not adjust the width of one individual cell. So for example, if I happen to click in this cell that has Santos spinach salad, and I change the width, it will automatically apply for the entire column. That's the thing when working with tables. You can't have different cells of different widths inside a particular column. It's kind of an all or nothing sort of thing. So if I were to choose, for example, to make the width of this particular column 200, notice how it applies to all the ones underneath it. Okay? And that's important for you to remember. This is kind of why a lot of times we've gotten away from using tables for layouts. We just have a lot more flexibility with CSS. Now I could also choose to I can make this a certain width, and I'm going to choose 200 pixels. You say, well, how come you mention pixels? Because if you remember, when I select my table, notice the width is 600 pixels. If it were percentage, then I would use column widths using percentages, not pixels. Okay? So you've got to remember that whenever you're working. Are you working in pixels or percentages? And then finally, I'm going to click over here, and I'm going to change the width to 200 as well. Because 200 plus 200 plus 200 equals what? Equals 600. But wait a minute. That doesn't look right. Something's not right up here. So when we come down here to the bottom, look at what's taking place. I'm going to move this up just a bit. At the bottom of your table, you'll notice that you have this green bar. And you'll notice that underneath each column, you have these numbers. The 200 is the number that you'd entered inside the width. But that 198 is Dreamweaver saying, listen, I know that you say you're 200, but really you're only 198. This middle column, I know you said you wanted it to be 200, but you know what? It's really 171. And this final column, yeah, I know you said 200, but it's really 161. So it's basically saying that I know that that's the numbers you wanted, but here's the reality. Okay, and a lot of that is determined by, first off, you have to remember that when you're adding in those numbers, or you're putting in those dimensions, the individual space, that table spacing or that cell spacing, remember we had a cell spacing of 10 pixels, and so all that gets added in. So technically you have 200, you have 10 plus 200 plus 10 plus 200 plus 10 plus 200, and that doesn't equal 600 pixels. And so what it does is Dreamweaver automatically configures it to be what it should be. And that's based upon the cell spacing as well as the content on the inside of it. Sometimes you're going to have content that Dreamweaver's like, listen, I know you want to be that size, but it's not going to be any smaller than this. And so it's just something to think about. Again, which is one of the reasons why we sort of got away from using tables for page layouts. You have a lot more control and flexibility using CSS. So if we wanted to clear all those out, and if we do clear them out, so for example, we can click underneath the column and choose clear column width. And the same thing for the others as well. And if we clear the column width, then basically we let Dreamweaver sort of determine what each one should be by default. And Dreamweaver will determine that based upon the content that you have within inside the cells. So for example, that's why description is so much wider than the others, because it has more content. And so, is it best to leave it up to Dreamweaver? Sometimes. It just sort of depends on how big your table is. And to be honest, with this particular example, I think it'd be fine. Some cases, though, I actually have gone through and said, I want this particular section or this particular column to be a certain width, and then I'll let the other two sort of default. So you have a lot of flexibility in how you do that. Now, when it comes to putting the height controls the row. Okay, so if width is for the column, then the height is for the entire row. Again, you cannot have cells in one row of different heights. It just doesn't work that way. And so whatever number you set is for the entire row. And usually what's going to happen is, my gut feeling is that whenever you do that, always try to find the cell that has the most content, because that's going to be the tallest. And so that's what you're going to be basically defining it against. Okay, so you can set a row. It's not often that I do, but if you wanted to, you can always set a height there. What should you use, percentage or pixels? It depends on what you chose whenever you created your table. In this particular case, we're using pixels. So if I gave it a height, so for example, if I chose 100, then it becomes 100 pixels for that entire row. Okay? All right, so I'm going to change that back to 0, or just get rid of it, because if I get rid of it, then I simply tell Dreamweaver that you can automatically figure it out based upon the content. Now, you'll notice here that I have an option to have no wrap, and that means the content will not wrap, which is kind of a pain. I don't recommend you select that, but you can if you wanted to. And you'll recall that earlier on that whenever we talked about creating our table row headers, which we had our first row selected as headers, and in fact that's why our text is automatically bold. Anything designated as the table header will automatically have a bold setting. So for example, what if we wanted this to be bolded? What if we wanted this section to be a table header? Highlight the text, and then click on header. And then the code over here will automatically adjust as well. So now I have a header across the top and a header across the left. Okay? But I'm just going to change that back. And then of course we can also change the color of a cell. So let me go and move this up because I'm going to need the room here for just a bit. And I'm going to select a cell, and I can basically change the background color. And notice how it changes. If you want to change the color for all cells in a particular row, just simply highlight them, change the background color, and notice how it does it for all of them. And if I wanted to get rid of a color, I could simply highlight the ones I want to get rid of, go back into my background, and then choose the box that has the red line through it that says none. Okay? So very easy to do. Now, one of the things I want to mention though as you go through here is that you'll notice that anytime we change these things, what we're basically doing is we are creating an inline style. And it's important that you understand that because if you're going to be creating a table that's going to be used on multiple pages, it's going to have different content, but it's basically the same table, you would not want to do this. You would want to go through and style your tables through your CSS. Now, let's say that you have 10 tables, they basically all have the same format. It's been coded inside your CSS, and that's great, but you want to make one particular thing on a table stand out, then yes, it's perfectly okay to go through and adjust that inside your settings down here and change the inline style. Because again, it may not necessarily apply to everything, just that particular one. But again, the bad thing about doing it this way is that if you have to go back later, let's say you have 10 tables and you've gone through and you've changed all the color based upon the properties panel down here, later on you're going to have to go through and change every single individual one. And so it's better to do this using CSS. Now the other thing that I want to mention to you whenever you're working with tables is the idea of making it more accessible. And for accessibility purposes, the proper technique is to actually associate your table headers with an ID, and then each of the items within inside that column with a header. So let me kind of show you how we would do that. So whenever you click inside the table header, for example up here, you'll notice that inside your properties panel there's a space for an ID. So what I would do is I would give this a specific ID and I would call it the same as the table header. So for example, item. I would then select this one and I would give it an appropriate ID of description. Again, whatever my table header is, that's what I'm going to create the ID for. Change that to cost. And if we look over at our code, we'll notice that each one of these has the appropriate ID associated with it. Okay? And so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to associate each one of these items within inside that column to that specific header. And so here's how we'll do that. And there's really no easy way to do this inside Dreamweaver other than just the old-fashioned copy and paste method. So let's go and select the Santos spinach salad, and when inside the opening table data tag, we're going to add the following. We would type in headers equals open quote and then the name of the ID. So for example, because this is in the item column, we're going to type in the name item, close quote. Whatever we have the ID up here for that header, that's what needs to be translated down here. And we would have to do this for each and every item. So what I would do is I'd simply highlight it, copy it, and then I would paste it for each individual item within inside that column. So for example, highlight that text to locate it, paste it within inside the opening tag. Okay. And here's the other one. There it is, and again within inside the opening tag. So now whenever a screen reader comes over this, it will associate this item with the appropriate header. And then of course we would do that for each one of these as well. We'd go through and create a headers called description for each one of these. Is it time consuming? Yes, but again if you're just doing the copy and paste method, no big deal. Now, really, the last thing that I want to show you in basically messing with your table is how do I insert additional rows? How do I insert additional columns and so forth? Well, what you can do is inside Dreamweaver, if you happen to select inside of a cell, and you can right-click, choose Table, and you can insert row or insert column. The thing is, though, if you happen to choose, for example, insert row, notice that it automatically applies a row above your selection. If I happen to choose an insert column, table, insert column, it will insert a column before the column I have selected. My other option is to, whenever I right click, when I go to table, I can choose insert rows or columns. This gives me a little bit more flexibility in that I can choose the number of rows or columns that I want, as well as where I want them, whether I want them to occur before or after. And again, same thing with rows, above or below. So you have a little bit more flexibility there. Okay. Now, when it comes to columns, you have one more place that you can do it, and that's down here at the bottom. You'll notice that beneath this column, in the green area, I had this little drop-down arrow. I can click on it. I can either select the entire column, I can clear its width, or I can insert a column to the left or to the right. So if I choose an insert column, there it is. Now, what happens if you inserted a column that you don't want? Simply put your mouse into any cell of that particular column, right-click on it, choose Table, and come down to Delete Column or Delete Row. In this case, since we're deleting a column, we're going to select that, and the entire column is done. We don't have to select the entire column. For example, you'll notice I have this extra row down here at the bottom. If I wanted to, I could also choose Table and then Delete Row. And there you go. It's that easy. I just simply have to select the cell, one cell, and I can do either the column or the row. Now, the last thing I want to show you when it comes to working with tables is this. Let's go and insert, let me insert 2 rows at the bottom of this. 2, and hit OK. Now, there will be on occasion where you feel like you need to merge certain cells. So for example, let's say that I have an item that will have a description right here in this top part. I don't know, so I'm not being very creative right now. Description, let's say 1, and then of course description 2. But both of these are applied to the exact same item. Well, what I can do is actually highlight these 2 cells, and I can merge them. I can either go to right-click, Table, Merge Cells, or inside my Properties panel, there's a place right down here where I can click on the cell, and it will merge the 2 of them together. So now I can have this line up, let's see, item, and this will line up with both of these descriptions right here. And if, of course, if they had just one price, then I could basically go through and merge those cells. Okay, so I could have one item with 2 descriptions and perhaps 1 price. So again, it's just one way of giving you some flexibility with your columns. Whenever we used to use tables for page layouts, that was a huge thing to be able to use. But what happens if you need to split it back out? Well, simply right-click inside the cell that you want, and you can go to Table, Split Cell, and you can choose the number of rows or the number of columns that you want to split it into. So for example, I basically want to split this into 2 rows. Okay, and there we are, back to our original state. And of course I can do it here, but this time let's go and do it from the Properties panel. I'm going to choose there, I'm going to click on Split the Cell, and I'm going to split this into 2 rows and hit OK. Okay, so again, working with tables is so much easier inside Dreamweaver. Otherwise, you'd have to go in and change all the individual code. And just look how complex this code has gotten just based upon the things that we've done right here. So your choice, but I highly recommend that if you're going to be using tables, it's a lot easier to use it inside Dreamweaver, working inside the design side than necessarily the code side. And keep in mind that anytime that you make changes to the individual cells, whether it's the horizontal, vertical, and so forth, you are applying an inline style. And the best way to style your tables is actually using CSS. So just something to keep in mind whenever you're building these out.